Today we are making a soup perfect for fall, in addition with a secret bread recipe that I happen to find on the back of the bag of flour.
Everybody should know how to use a knife. Use everything, waste nothing.
Let's start at the beginning.
It ain't that hard, okay?
Welcome back to Bourdain. My name is Rich May. We're working through Anthony Bourdain's cookbook for the first freaking time. I'm a noob and I try every recipe. So we're making simple fennel and tomato soup with some bread that I actually have some experience with making. Back with COVID, I made bread almost every day. I'm gonna show you a few tricks that I use to hopefully make a salad bread. I have Bourdain's book linked down below in the description. Let's get moving. So the night prior to making our soup, we are going to begin with the bread. This is a no-knead recipe straight from the back of the flour package. In my opinion, it's very important to weigh out the ingredients when baking as opposed to using measuring cups. Your cup of flour may be different from mine, but the weight will always be the same. That's why they do this in Europe. We shoot for 600 grams of filtered water. Not essential to be filtered, but I think it's best for the dough. We get this into a large bowl and then we add our yeast. This is a 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast that I have been storing in the freezer almost indefinitely. Using the best tool in the kitchen, we mix this up until it's well dissolved and add 2 1/4 teaspoons of sea salt. Once again, mixing until this is well dissolved as well. Now we add 600 grams of flour. This is King Arthur white bread flour. At the risk of sounding too sciencey, bread flour's main advantage is that it has more protein. More protein equals better gluten development. More gluten means a stronger dough, which means it can capture those carbon dioxide bubbles our yeast is going to create. It's now time to mix. Here we do have the option to use our hands. I actually opt for the spatula. I just find it a little more efficient, a little cleaner, and it better lets me scrape the edges of the bowl. The dough is well mixed and incorporated. Nothing super magical is going to happen just yet. We're going to cover this with plastic wrap and let it sit overnight for about 10 to 12 hours until it gets nice and bubbly and well transformed. The next morning, here we have our dough. As you can see, it has transformed, almost doubled in size, and you can see those little bubbles I was talking about. The directions then call for us to beat the crap out of this thing to get all the carbon dioxide out for a second rise. Using my former bread knowledge, I stretch and fold this to hopefully strengthen our dough. This method has a few purposes, but in general, we're trying to get stronger, more formed dough. We get a tall Dutch oven greased up with a little avocado oil. The directions weren't too specific on what kind of oil, followed by a dusting of cornmeal. As you can see, this ain't no cornmeal. I only had semolina flour. We then lay our little dough baby into... I don't know why I said that. We're going to put the dough into the Dutch oven to rest for another few hours. It's time to move on to our soup. Fennel and tomato soup. Very few ingredients, something I absolutely love. And I took note of a little improv. Bourdain says you can add some slices of garlic. I figure we take that up a notch. 2 regular tomatoes. Unfortunately, we're kind of at the end of the season here in Jersey. I slice them up roughly and get an entire head of garlic, slicing that down the middle. We pop this in my favorite and only cookware, a cast iron skillet, a small one with some salt and pepper and a nice generous glugging of olive oil into our absolutely decrepit toaster oven. It's become a meme at this point. Moving on to 2 heads of fennel, removing the stalks and then slicing down the middle, being sure to get the root end out, which is pretty easy. It's got like a little visual guide for you. Just be careful with the hands. We get both of these thinly sliced and we move on to our onion. Again, not too particular here, just thinly sliced. I figure you've seen me cut many an onion before if you've watched my videos. Checking on our roasted tomatoes are coming along okay, but the garlic's getting a little too brown, so I flip it over so the skin can get a little roasting as well. 1 medium potato. Bourdain doesn't say to remove the skin, but I figure we should. Cutting this into about 1/4 by 1/2 inch cubes. It's always a bit of a challenge for me figuring out how to go about slicing round objects, but we make it work. About 45 minutes in, the tomatoes and garlic are looking amazing and smelling even better. I decide to remove the garlic because it's just kind of reached that point of no return. After about 15 minutes, the tomatoes are finished and look heavenly. Into a pot over medium-high heat, we add 4 tablespoons of olive oil. Once we're up to temperature, the chopped up vegetables go in. Bringing the heat down to medium, we cook this off for 7 to 10 minutes to sweat it out, ensuring that we don't get any color. The smells here in the kitchen are absolutely amazing. The bread's giving off a nice yeasty smell along with the vegetables sauteing. Speaking of our bread, it might have risen a little too much, but it's time to rip up the oven to 450 degrees and preheat for 10 to 15 minutes. The vegetables have sweated nicely quickly, and we now make the error of adding 6 cups of chicken stock prior to adding the tomatoes to cook. So I goofed here. I didn't really feel like straining the vegetables and the soup, so I go in with our can of tomatoes, our lovely roasted tomatoes, which may make your mouth water just looking at them, making sure to get every drop of that infused olive oil. Maybe even a little deglazing could have been called for here, but we add the garlic as well and bring this up to a boil, then down to a simmer over medium-low, and this should cook for about an hour. It's time to prep our overly aerated dough with a little dusting of flour. This is more so for aesthetics, taking some scissors and slicing into the dough in a nice little pattern. My spidey sensors are going off here that we definitely let this dough rise a little too much, but that's okay. Into the oven for 45 minutes. One underrated aspect I really enjoy when making soups or stocks or kind of slow cooking dishes, you get to clean up and tidy up the kitchen. Meanwhile, the house is filling with a lovely aroma, and I find it's just a really great way to channel my ADD in a multitasking fashion that isn't detrimental. And while we wait, I figure let's do a little prep for our dish that I'm actually going to be making tomorrow. Short ribs roasted in the oven. I figure we do a little dry brine here, hit them up with some salt, pop them in the fridge, and they are good to go. After about half an hour, this is our soup getting nice and darker in color. We check on our bread after 45 minutes, and to my fear, it didn't rise how I would have liked. This is definitely a sign that we let it overrise. It goes back in the oven for 10 to 15 minutes with the lid off. The soup comes off the burner and we allow it to cool, getting ready to blendify this thing. Now, unfortunately, I was a little crunched for time here. My dad is going to be home very soon to cook up dinner, so I added a little butter in an effort to cool this down, and it didn't work. So then we resort to my sink trick, something I learned with demi-glace. We submerge the entire vessel in an ice bath, or in this case, an ice pack sink bath. It's these little unforeseeable moments that kind of make me laugh. I just can feel the judgment and the comments coming. Quick check on our bread, and it is finished. It has that nice dark brown color, not too dark, and the fun part now, removing it from our Dutch oven. To my chagrin, I'm sorry, I really wanted to use that word, we try our best and it doesn't come out with the wooden spoon, so I delicately go in with a metal knife and it actually breaks free. Quite unique in shape, but I can smell this thing and I know it's gonna taste wonderful. Now, the temptation here is to cut into this thing immediately, have that nice action shot with steam rising out of it. However, further cooking is involved after pulling this out of the oven, so we're gonna let this hang out for about 10, 15, even longer if we can, but move on to pureeing our soup. Cautiously adding our now cooled but still dangerously hot mixture to the blender. We put this on puree until it's got a nice consistency. Back to a saucepan, a little trick I found and just kind of felt, to run this through a strainer. This way we're gonna get rid of all those little kind of burnt bits, all the tomato skin, resulting in a nice silky soup. While that's coming up to temperature, it's time to slice into our hockey puck like bread. The crumb, which refers to those little air bubbles, is much smaller and denser than I would prefer, but the flavor is definitely there from fermenting this dough for nearly 15 to 16 hours. Slice this thing up and put it in the toaster while we go to plate our soup. Some nice sunlight shining in, which never hurts. An acidic tomato-based soup could use a little rounding out with some cream. Drizzling that around the edge, I'm not too crazy about how that looks, so I give it a stir, and that looks much sexier to me. It is a fennel tomato soup after all, so I saved some of the little fennel fronds, black pepper, which is one of my weaknesses on anything and everything, and we have our bread with butter, which I don't know if any other soup demands to be dipped in more than tomato. It is rare that a soup can make me almost angry at how luxurious and simple it is. This was one of those soups. I think our improv roasted tomatoes and garlic really added some nice depth, along with straining this out, adding a silkiness to it. These are two things I kind of just felt through working with this book. I'm learning to improv a little bit. If you'd like to support me, think about subscribing. It really helps me out a lot. If you want to check out those short ribs, I'll have the video right here to your right. This was Back to Bourdain.
Stay organized and clean up after yourself. You do the best you can.